Hello, formulators. It's Astarie with Astarie Apothecary, and welcome to the making of the creamy body wash, which is a formula that I have available in my website for you to make your own body wash. So, the first part of this video is a voiceover because for some reason I did not talk through this part of the making process. I'm not sure why, but I didn't. But anyway, this very first part, I am just measuring out all of my water-based ingredients. Right now, you see me pouring in glycerin. The first thing that I poured in was distilled water. This is not going to be all of the glycerin that I use. I'm going to use a little bit of glycerin in the next part, but I did add the majority of my glycerin in here. I'm just mixing that up. And then I am also going to mix in some aloe vera liquid. I have some that I'm just made. I normally make my own aloe vera liquid. And then I also had a little bit extra because I didn't have quite enough. And I'm just going to mix that up and get that on the heat so I can get that warming. And that is going to be the very first part of making the creamy body wash, is getting the water phase blended and on the heat so it can be warming up. And then the next part will be our xanthan phase. So that's coming up next. That'll be the regular audio though, because I actually was talking at that part. Okay, so now we're gonna start mixing up our xanthan gum phase of this formula. I don't really have it separated into a different phase, I don't think, but you want to do this step separate of your water ingredients, so let's start with that. So with xanthan gum, it is very finicky. It doesn't like to dissolve, and it will give you clumps and lumps and trouble. So what we do is we use something that can solubilize it, and that is glycerin. Now, I added the majority of my glycerin to my water phase already, but I left off about, for me, about an ounce. You can leave off a small portion of your glycerin to mix in your xanthan gum. So the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and measure off my xanthan gum. My glycerin. You just need a small amount so that you can disperse that xanthan gum into the glycerin so that it will mix into your water phase a lot easier and make it so much easier to disperse that xanthan gum. Alright, now I'm going to mix in my xanthan gum. Now, I am using xanthan gum soft specifically. This will make a clear formula if you are making something that you want to be clear, but this is specially made so that your formula will not come out stringy and slimy like food grade xanthan gum. That is a different type of xanthan gum. This is specially made for cosmetics, so that is why I recommend this one. You can use xanthan gum clear, but I personally prefer xanthan gum soft. But any cosmetic grade xanthan gum will be a better choice. Now, if I'm only measuring a small amount, then I will use a different weighing device, something like a weigh boat, something very, very light so that the scale doesn't have a hard time picking up the xanthan gum. But I'm using a larger amount for this, so I should be fine with the beaker. And you just weigh out the amount that you need for your size batch. This particular scale is pretty sensitive, but if it was a tiny amount, a scale that has even more sensitivity, like a jeweler scale, would be even better. And take your time as you measure. You don't want to use too much. It will affect the viscosity of your final product. So, be careful. Take your time. I'm just going to blend that into the glycerin. And you will see that it is blending in. Let's see. The glycerin is just able to handle that particles. As soon as you try to add it to liquid, xanthan gum is going to start trying to hydrate, but it's not going to hydrate in a way that will be conducive to then later mixing it in if you just clump it. You can pour it in, but it'll take a long time to fully disperse, and who has time for that? So there we go. You can decide how much glycerin you want to take out. You can mix the xanthan gum into the full amount of glycerin. It's up to you. I just like to use a small amount. All right, and then just keep watching to see how I incorporate this into my water phase and complete the rest of the creamy body wash. So you will see, let's see, can you see down in there that I probably should have used a little bit more glycerin, so it didn't fully disperse that xanthan gum. That's okay. It'll just take a little bit longer to disperse, but I'm going to put this on the heat on a little bit of a lower temperature so that this can warm up, so that when I blend it in with my surfactant phase, it is able to keep everything melted and will not cause everything to seize up and get hard again. And it will also continue to dissolve the rest of that xanthan gum. So don't do what I did. Use a little bit more. I wasn't thinking straight and realized that I'm making a larger batch than I normally do. So I should have used more glycerin. But it's all right. It's all right. These things happen. It will dissolve. It'll just take a little bit longer this time. But the warming it up will help as well. All right, so I'm going to just put that back on the heat. I'm going to turn that down a little bit and let that stay warm while we work on our surfactant phase. So I have already poured in my Cocoa Purple betaine. This is going to help dilute the other surfactant, the SCI powder, as well as make it a little bit milder. It's going to help to also melt the SCI powder. And yeah, I've already poured that in, and I wanted to make sure that I came on and talked through the SCI pouring portion. SCI is very airborne. It has tiny particles that will get into your lungs. They will make you cough. They will make you sneeze. So you do want to wear a particle mask, which I will link one down below. But you want to wear a particle mask while you are pouring this so that you do not cause irritation. That's just the name of the game with things that are very tiny particles that can then irritate your mucous membranes. So just be very careful with that. You don't want to irritate yourself. Once it is hydrated, it will no longer be airborne and it will no longer cause problems. But as you pour it, it will definitely be very airborne, which you'll see as I add it in. But I am going to wear a mask and make sure that I protect my membranes, because coughing and sneezing is no fun, especially when you're trying to make a product. So stay tuned. Okay, so now is the point where you just let everything heat up, melt down, and get to, for the SCI, for that, all of that powder is melted down, and it will become kind of like a paste, which I will show you that. My xanthan gum is still dissolving out. Again, if you use more glycerin, you won't have to worry about this step. It will be completely mixed into your water phase. This is also the step where if you would like to add a color, like a water-soluble dye, you can add that in this step to your water phase. Remember, if it's water-soluble, then it has to go into your water phase. If you're using a mica, you can add that to your oil phase, as micas are dispersible in oil as opposed to water. And if you're using a lake, you would use that in your oil phase, as they are oil-soluble. If you do not want to add color right now, like if you're doing what I'm doing and making a large batch to keep and make orders later, I will show you at the end of the video how I add in my fragrance and color after the fact. I use both dyes, lakes, and micas, all three. It just depends on what I'm doing. Micas are a lot easier. There's lots of colors already pre-mixed. For my lakes, I only buy, primary colors, so I have to mix my own colors, and that can get tricky sometimes. So it really depends on you, but I will show you how I do that after all of this is completed, cooled down, and ready to be bottled. So all of this, I'm going to let this continue to melt down. The SCI will take a little while, especially with a large batch like what I'm making. I have my heat up pretty high, and I'm just going to keep an eye on it. And I'm going to take the camera over and show you what it is looking like. So here it is right now. It's thick, but as you can see, it is starting to melt down there on the bottom, so I'm just going to come back and continually stir it. But you'll see your waxes, your emulsifying wax, and as well as lumps from the powder. Now, if you use the noodles, which you can absolutely do, it will take a little bit longer to melt down, but all of it is possible to be used. Just keep an eye on everything and keep stirring. You don't want anything to burn. Don't put it up too high to where it's going to burn on the bottom. And like I said, keep coming back and stirring. If you're making a small amount, this won't take as long, but since I'm making such a large amount, it will take a little bit more time. So I will bring you back when everything is melted down so you can see the consistency and what it looks like at that point. Okay, I just wanted to bring you in for an update on the melting process. We are much more melted than we were the last time, but there are still lumps and clumps. Some of that is the emulsifying waxes. Some of that is still clumps of SCI, but we are getting there. The camera's not picking up the color very well, but it does get like a really, 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 really light yellow, off-white type of color. I don't know if it's going to pick it up. But yeah, so you'll see that sort of change. But yes, there's still lots of lumps, still lots to melt down. Like I said, this can take a little while. Put it on, do something else while you wait. Work on labels. If you're like me and procrastinate on labels, work on your labels nearby while this is melting. Okay? All right, I'll bring you back when we are done. All right. We are all nice and melted. So this is I don't know how to describe it. It's like a thin paste. I'm trying to think of the best description, but that's exactly what you want. It's not going to be super thin, but it's not, I mean, it can be a little bit thicker, and that's fine, but this is the consistency. let's see if I can get this to focus properly. There we go. You can see that there's no lumps and clumps. The only thing that you'll see, there may be a few air bubbles, and that's fine. But that's it. You can pretty much see if there's any of the SCI powder still not melted. And you want to make sure that it's all melted. You don't want to leave any powder spots in your final formula. In your final batch. Alright, so the next part is pretty simple. We're going to blend in our oils and water. Let's see. There we go. We're going to blend our water phase into the oil phase, blend everything up, then we're going to let it cool and add in our final phase, which will be our preservative. And if you are using it in this batch, fragrance. I'm not adding fragrance because I'm making a large batch that I will break down as I need it. But I'm going to show you how I do the next part, and it's really nothing to it. I'm going to pour in the water phase, blend it with my stick blender. I'm going to come back as it cools and continue to blend it a bit until it is in the correct temperature range for my preservative. Every preservative has a different temperature range. Mine is better to be added under 122 degrees. So when this reaches below 122 degrees, that is when I will add in my preservative. But like I said, you'll want to check with whatever preservative you are using to see what the recommended temperature range is. So just keep watching. I'm going to go ahead and fast forward through mixing in the water phase and getting the blending started. Actually, before I mix it in, I just wanted to show you that even though I did make that mishap with the xanthan gum, I actually used my stick blender to help break up those chunks that were in there. So now everything has nicely dissolved. This is pretty warm. I got it a little bit hotter than I needed to, but that's okay. It's not going to affect anything. There's just a little bit of a foam on the top. That's just the air bubbles that I blended in when I used my stick blender. But I just wanted to show you that, you can hit it with a stick blender. If you were making something that was like a clear gel, honestly, or like a face wash or a body wash, different, like a gel type body wash, honestly, the only thing that it means is that you'll have to wait for all of the air bubbles to dissipate before you bottle it, so that you're not pouring in more air than actual product. But it's really not a big deal. There it is. You can kind of see down in there. Like I said, it has a lot of air bubbles. Otherwise, it's basically clear. Excuse me, I do use aloe vera gel or aloe vera liquid, so it's a little bit has a little bit of a haze to it from that, but generally it's clear. It just has the air bubbles in it. That's all. to blend this as it cools down, and I will bring you back when we are at the proper temperature to add in our preservative. And that honestly will be it for this portion. But I will show you testing the pH, as well as with a different batch, I'll show you how to scent and color it separately if that's what you choose to do. So I'll see you back in a little bit. Alrighty, here we are back the next day. This is completely cooled now, and you can see that there were some of the bubbles that rose to the top. I'm just going to mix that in. You can hit it with the stick blender one more time if it doesn't want to totally mix in, but you can sort of see that viscosity. Not too thin, not too thick. If you don't like the consistency, again, you can adjust your water percent and your surfactant percent to be more of whatever thickness or thinness you would prefer. So now I'm going to hit this with the stick blender real quick just to break up those little pieces that were on the top. If you were constantly mixing it as it cooled and not leaving it the way that I did, you wouldn't have that as much. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and hit this with the stick blender real quick, and then we are going to check the pH. Okay, I'm going to move this off to the side. Oh. And I need a couple of containers, so I'm going to grab those and be right back. Alright, so in order to check the pH, we need to make a diluted solution. The reason why we need to do that is the pH meter that I have is unable to check the pH in a thicker solution. It can do it in anything that's liquid, so water, toner, anything really thin and liquid. But in this case, it's thicker, so it needs to be diluted in order to get an accurate pH reading. So what I need to do is make a 10% solution of my product and distilled water. Distilled water does not affect the pH of your product. And all that means is that I'm going to mix 10% of my product with 90% of water. And you can decide how much you want to do. I usually do like 20 grams, something like that. Not a large amount, but large enough so that I have enough to stick my pH meter down into. And then I also need another container of just distilled water to rinse off my pH meter. So I'm going to get out my distilled water, and I'm going to show you how to do the calculations for your percentages. It's really simple. So you're going to take your calculator. I'm going to do 20 grams. Okay, so I'm going to say 20 grams times 10 and then hit the percent sign. So I need 2 grams of my product, and of course that will mean that I need 18 grams of distilled water. It's just that simple. But just to show you, to figure out the other percent, you would do 20 grams times 90%, and it'll give you a total of 18. That will work with grams, ounces, pounds, whatever unit of measurement you are using. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and measure out my water and my product and get my pH meter out. here is my pH meter. I'm going to go ahead and just check the pH. I will have this pH meter linked in the description box below. So this is only for how to use this particular pH meter. There are different types. You'll just want to use the instructions provided for whichever pH meter you receive. I stress that it is better to use an actual pH digital meter as opposed to strips. Strips are not going to be as accurate, and they're not going to work across all applications. So digital pH meter, I'm always going to suggest that. Like I said, this one will be linked below, but just look up digital pH meter, and even if you have to start with a cheaper version first, that is still a great option. So for this one, I need to first rinse off my pH meter. I usually will turn it on first and go ahead and rinse it off in my distilled water. And then I will tap it on my paper towels to dry it a bit. And then I am going to put it in my solution. I have hit the measure button, and I'm going to stir it until I get a smiley face. Alright, I have a smiley face there. So ironically, the pH is 6.66. That is a little high for me. I would prefer it to be somewhere around 5.5, 5 to 5.5. So I'm going to use my citric acid solution, buffer solution, to lower the pH a bit. Don't mind my bottle, it's a little janky, but this is a 50-50 solution of citric acid and distilled water. It's a little bit more diluted so that it won't be quite as strong, and I'm just going to add a couple of drops with my pipette into my main batch, stir it up, let it sit for a second, and keep measuring the pH until it is where I would like it to be. I'm just going to fast forward through that part, but that's it. You can use straight citric acid, but I prefer to use a solution so that I know that it'll blend in well. I don't have to worry about whether the crystals are completely dissolved. I know that this will dissolve in. It's just water and already dissolved citric acid. But again, it's just 50-50. So this is a 2-ounce bottle. So it's 1 ounce citric acid, 1 ounce distilled water. That's it. Actually, I think this is 4 ounces. But anyway, you get my point. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and you can watch. Oh, before I do that, you will have to make a fresh solution after you have added your citric acid to the main base, as this is no longer going to be accurate. So make sure you dump this out, wipe it out, clean it out so that it doesn't affect your next pH reading. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how I scent and color separate batches as I go, because I typically will make a 1-gallon batch and not add my color or fragrance to it, and then add fragrance and all of that later. So I have a sample order for my bulk and private label shop, which is on Etsy, link below if you would like me to make some products for you so you don't have to. But that's beside the point. And they wanted a sample of our black tie fragrance, so I'm going to show you how I do that. So I have some that I have made previously that I'm going to grab. It is in I don't even know if I can get this in the camera, but it's in one of these 2-gallon buckets I got from Home Depot. Just sanitize it, and I pour in my products. So I add fragrance personally at 2%. Your percentage is going to depend on you, but also it's going to depend on the fragrance usage rate as determined by IFRA, which, oh goodness, International Fragrance something something something. Okay, I don't remember the full name for the acronym, but it's IFRA. Any reputable fragrance oil supplier will have that information available to you somewhere on their website. But anyway, so you can go up or go down depending on that usage rate for the fragrance that you are using. All of the fragrances that I use can be used at least 2%, up to 2%. So I do 2%. So just like with my 10% solution for testing the pH, it's the same process. I'm going to say 2 ounces times 2%. That is 0.04. So that means that I need 0.04 ounces of fragrance, and the rest is going to be my actual product. So this is my black tie fragrance, and it is colored in like a light black, I guess that's technically gray color. So I'm going to go ahead and get my fragrance oil. I'm using this really large beaker because my other beakers need to be sanitized, so don't mind that. Let me go. Okay, so I'm going to add in 0.04 of my fragrance. Okay, and then honestly, you can do the math either way that works for you. You can take 2 ounces and subtract 0.04, or you can do the percentage option. Either way, so that's 2 ounces times 96%, which is, 1.92. So I need 1.92 ounces of my body wash, but I'm not going to put that in yet. Into my fragrance oil, I am going to put, in this case, I'm using mica. If you were using oil-soluble lakes, this would be the time to use it, as they are obviously oil-soluble, so you want to put them in your fragrance oil first, mix them together, and then add in your body wash so that it will dissolve completely. Mica is also more dispersible in oil, so it'll disperse better in your fragrance oil than if you just add it straight to your product. You can add it to your product, but it takes a little bit more to blend it in. So I'm going to grab my mica, which I am using mica from my favorite mica supplier, Nurture Soap. And I am not adding a whole lot. Doesn't take a lot. Just enough to give it a little bit of a gray look. This is way too big of a beaker to be doing this in, but I'm just going to mix that into the fragrance. Whoops. It's going to be a little difficult just because of the size of the beaker. Again, that's okay. It'll still work. Alright, so you see that has all dispersed very easily. No issues. Alrighty. Now I'm going to pour in that 0.92 of body wash. Now, 1.92, I'm sorry. Don't be like me. You shouldn't pour directly from the container because you can, you know, mess stuff up. But I'm just going to go slowly until I get close, and then just let it come out even slower. Alright, so I'm almost there. So what I'm going to do is use my spatula for the last little bit so that I don't go over. And I still went over, but that's okay. Those couple of tenths of an ounce will not make a huge difference. Alright, just going to blend this up. And like I said, you can do this with lakes, you can do this with mica. If you want to use a dye, that needs to be a water-soluble dye. That needs to be blended with water. So, I wouldn't suggest actually using them in this case after the fact. If you're really brave, you could take, and I have actually done this. So this is an extreme measure, but I did it because the color I needed was specific to needing to use the dye that I had. I took a small amount of distilled water and I actually added preservatives to it, because the problem is that if you add water, you have not added enough preservatives to cover that bit of water. Even the smallest bit, you don't want to risk causing mold to grow in your product. So this is a trick. Even if you make an emulsion of like a body cream or something like that, you can use this trick. I usually will keep a small container of preserved distilled water. So the preservative I use is liquid germol. You need it at 0.5%. So it would be, say if it's 2 ounces, same concept. It would be 0.5% of preservative and 95.5% of water. Mix that together, and then I would take a couple of drops of that, mix my dye in it, and then you could mix it into your product. But you do not want to add extra water without that buffer of preservative. Even if you use, say you want to use aloe liquid or rose water, you do not want to use it unless it is preserved before you add it to your product. Aloe is going to start to grow mold immediately once you add it to the water, unless there's a preservative. Same thing with like a rose water. Most of them that you buy from suppliers are already preserved, so you don't have to worry about that. I generally make my own aloe liquid, but I add preservative to it because unless you are making it and using it in your product immediately, but you still want to be careful and again always have that buffer. I don't know if the color is really showing up in the camera properly, but it's just a very gray, light gray color. All right. That's really basically it. I just need to put this in a bottle, add a label, and that's it. You have completed making your creamy body wash. There are so many variations that you can make to this formula. Like I was just mentioning, you could add rose water. You could add all types of hydrosols. You can add different types of humectants. You can use different types of emulsifiers, different types of stabilizers. You can change up the butters and the oil. You could even play around with the surfactants. That's a little bit more tricky, and I wouldn't suggest it right away, especially if you are a new maker, but it is something that you could possibly do, but it would take some experimentation, learning about active surfactant matter, and all of these things are things that I will be sharing more information about as we go further along with the channel and videos, so stay tuned for that. But yes, there are many variations that you can add. You could add turmeric, you could add charcoal powder. Maybe you want to add like a coconut milk powder or colloidal oats. So many different options you can do. So just experiment. I provide formulas in percents so that you can play around with the percentages, but still have that base formula to have a great end product. But as a formulator, playing around, practicing, making something your own is what it is all about. So I want to thank you so much for joining me for this making video. If you would like the formula for this body wash, please check the link in the bio. It will take you to my shop where I have this formula and a few others that you can use to make yourself. And as I mentioned earlier, if you like what you see but you don't really want to have to learn a new product, I also provide many of these things private label and in bulk, and I also offer wholesale. So if that is something that you're interested in, please feel free to message me over on my Etsy shop. Again, the link will be down in the description box below. If you are watching this and you are not a business owner and you just want some body wash or some other product along those lines, there is another link in my bio that is my actual shop that has my individual products. I would love it if you would check out both. And if you have any questions or just want to leave a comment, do so in the comment section below. And if you like what you see, please like this video, subscribe, and stay tuned for more. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time. Bye.